The Only Enemy by the Backyard Buddhist. There's a difficult truth at the center of Buddhist practice, and it's one that many of us spend most of our lives trying not to see. The Buddha taught that ignorance, avidya, is the root poison from which suffering emerges. Not merely ignorance in the ordinary sense of not knowing enough facts, but a deeper spiritual blindness, the mistaken belief that we are fundamentally separate from one another. From that illusion comes fear. From fear comes craving and aversion. And from those, eventually, come hatred, violence, greed, war, and cruelty. We often spend our lives searching for enemies. We name nations as enemies, political parties as enemies, religions as enemies, races as enemies, neighbors as enemies, former lovers as enemies, even ourselves as enemies. But Buddhism asks us to look much deeper than the surface of conflict. It asks us to examine the very mechanism by which the mind manufactures the categories of us and them in the first place. And when we do, something unsettling begins to emerge. There has never truly been an other. The Vietnamese Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh called this interbeing. Nothing exists independently. Everything arises together through everything else. Your breath depends on trees. The trees depend on rain. The rain depends on oceans. The oceans depend on clouds. Your body contains sunlight, ancient stars, bacteria, memories, ancestors, grief, hope, language, culture, and countless living beings cooperating silently just to keep you alive for another moment. You are not a sealed container wandering through the universe alone. You are the universe appearing temporarily as you, and so am I. The Buddha expressed this vision repeatedly through dependent origination, the teaching that all phenomena arise interdependently. Nothing stands isolated. Nothing possesses a permanent, independent essence. The separate self we defend so ferociously is, in many ways, a conceptual construction constantly reinforced by fear and habit. Yet this illusion of separation is incredibly seductive because it permits us to do terrible things. The moment we fully believe another person is fundamentally other, compassion becomes negotiable. Once another human being is reduced to an abstraction, a category, a threat, a label, or an enemy, harm becomes psychologically possible. History bears witness to this over and over again. Every genocide, every war, every act of cruelty begins first with a story about separation. They are not like us. They deserve it. They are the problem. But the Bodhisattva path interrupts this madness. The Bodhisattva looks upon all beings and sees not strangers, but reflections. Not enemies, but wounded manifestations of the same suffering consciousness. Even those who commit harm are themselves trapped within delusion, fear, conditioning, and ignorance. This does not mean Buddhism asks us to become passive in the face of injustice. Compassion is not weakness. Wisdom is not surrender to evil. The Buddha himself intervened in conflicts, corrected harmful behavior, and spoke firmly when necessary. But the difference lies here. The awakened heart resists hatred even while resisting harm. That is extraordinarily difficult. It is easy to love those who agree with us, easy to extend compassion toward those we already understand. The real crucible of practice is whether we can still perceive shared humanity in those we fear, oppose, or condemn. Because the Dharma continually returns us to this uncomfortable realization. The suffering of others is not separate from our own. When hatred spreads anywhere, the human heart itself is diminished. When violence becomes normalized, consciousness itself becomes wounded. When we delight in the destruction of others, we fracture something within ourselves. In the Dhammapada, the Buddha says, hatred is never appeased by hatred in this world. By non-hatred alone is hatred appeased. This is an eternal law. Why? Because hatred always depends upon separation for its survival. Compassion dissolves separation. This is why genuine awakening inevitably flowers into nonviolence. Not as a commandment imposed from outside, but as a natural consequence of seeing clearly. If I truly recognize that your suffering and my suffering are intertwined, harming you begins to feel like harming my own hand. And perhaps that's precisely what humanity fears most. Because if we truly lived from this realization of interconnectedness, many of the systems upon which our world currently operates would become impossible to sustain. Exploitation would become intolerable. Indifference would become unbearable. Cruelty would become psychologically agonizing. Who could knowingly destroy even a portion of their own heart? The Zen tradition often speaks of awakening not as acquiring something new, but as remembering something ancient and obvious that we have overlooked. Perhaps compassion is exactly that. Not morality imposed from above, not virtue signaling, not ideological performance, but the simple and devastating recognition that there is no other to hate. Only life appearing in different forms, only suffering wearing different faces, only ourselves meeting ourselves endlessly across time. And so our practice becomes the gradual dismantling of this illusion of separateness. Every bow, every period of zazen, every act of patience, every moment we refrain from retaliation, every time we listen instead of condemn, every time we choose understanding over dehumanization, all of it chips away at the ancient delusion of us and them. Until perhaps one day, even briefly, we see clearly enough to understand what the Buddha saw beneath the Bodhi tree. That this entire universe is woven together so intimately that compassion is not merely a moral ideal, it is simply realism. And from the perspective of awakening, there has only ever been us.